Today, I'm really glad to be talking with Derek Hill, the son of the legendary Formula One driver Phil Hill, the only American driver to win a world championship in 1961 with Ferrari, and he competed in 49 Grand Prix. He won 3 races, and sharing the cars with drivers like Wolfgang von Trips or Mike Horton, Dan Gurney, and Bruce McLaren. And your father was truly a legend in Formula One. And today I'm talking with you, Derek, and I'm really happy for it.
Oh, thank you, Noah. I'm very happy to be here talking with you.
My first question was on your father, of course. I want to know how he fell in love with the sport in general.
Yeah, well, I think my father was one of those rare people who just fell in love with cars completely at a very, very young age. I think his mom or his aunt recalled that the first words he ever said was car in garage, and he was already taking the car out, driving around in the neighborhood at a very young age. Maybe about your age, he started to take the car out of the garage and drive around. And you know, back then, maybe it was easier to get away with stuff like that. But really was completely obsessed with cars. And as he grew older, he was fascinated reading books about European racing, especially. And he was reading about the early Le Mans races, the Mille Miglia, and that's what really captivated his imagination about racing. And when he was able to start working as a teenager for a foreign car import agency in Hollywood, he was around some of the most amazing cars, like early Lancias and all sorts of European cars, Jaguars. And he was a mechanic. He thought he was just a mechanic. He only dreamed of racing, but he was able to really work very well on the cars. And soon he was able to buy an MGTC through the dealership he was working for. And an MGTC was the most just exciting looking sports car back then. I mean, we look at them now and we can't imagine that this was like an exciting sports car, but compared to the big American cars that were around, this looked like a very sporty car. And he was driving it, and he started doing these time trials and sort of rallies, not so much racing like we know it on a road course, but that was the early beginnings for him. And I think he was hooked on it from that point on, right? There was World War II that put a stop to all of the motor racing around the world. But after the war was over, in the late 1940s, when he was about 18, 19, 20 years old, in California especially, some of the generals, there was one Air Force general in particular who was turning all the airfields, the airports, into racetracks. And all these servicemen that were coming back from the war in Europe were really good at working on machinery and shaping metal. And that's where the whole hot rod culture was being born in California. But then there was also this intrigue of European cars that were being brought over. And that's just more the route that my father was taking. At the same time, he went over to England. His boss sent him to England when he was very young. He was about, I'd say about 20 years old, to get training. And I'm tying this into Formula One because it's very interesting. He was over there working for MG, getting a certificate as a mechanic, Rolls-Royce, SU carburetors, Jaguar. And the first Formula One races were happening. Alberto Ascari was racing for Ferrari, and he went to Silverstone as a young man, and he was watching in the grandstands from the side of the racetrack. He was watching Alberto Ascari at Silverstone, and even the Queen was being driven around the track. And so in many respects, my father was just coming into racing with Formula One. And it was the early days. It was the early days of Ferrari. It was when guys like Bruce McLaren were race car drivers. They were not yet a team. And you know, it was early days. And so everything he was doing did not yet have the big famous name that they have today. He was part of the creation of all of that.
So you watched the first ever Formula One Grand Prix?
I have to look back and think if it was the first. It might have been the second year. I have to read my history a little better, but it was in the very beginning. And so, you know, for him to look at that, his dream at that point was that he would one day be a mechanic for a very good racing team. And meanwhile, he went back home from that trip in England, and he was able to buy an XK120 Jaguar. He borrowed money from his family. He borrowed money from his friends. He took that car and he put it on the boat, because they were still going around on ships a lot back then. And he put the Jaguar on the Queen Mary, which is a famous ship that still sits here in Los Angeles in a harbor, is kind of a museum. And he got off the boat in New York and he drove all the way across the country. Now, mind you, back then in America, we didn't have the big highways yet. So he was driving on sort of country roads all the way from New York. He stopped in Indianapolis to see the Indy 500, and he met a friend of his. He met his friend, Richie Ginther. Now, some people who read the history know that Richie Ginther became his teammate. And he and Richie were just friends where my father lived in Santa Monica, and they both worked together at this dealership. And he and Richie drove back in that XK120 all the way from Indianapolis back to Los Angeles, probably going as fast as the car would go the whole way. So I can only imagine the adventures these young men had.
Your father is the only American driver to have won a F1 World Championship, and plus he won it with a Ferrari car. So I wanted to know what was his relationship with Enzo Ferrari?
Well, the relationship with Enzo Ferrari was, I would say, good and not so good, because Enzo Ferrari was not an easy man to get along with. Yet, I think from my father's upbringing, he had a very strict father. He had a father who wanted him to not be in racing cars. He thought that was a ridiculous, wild exploit that just a proper young man shouldn't do. And his father was the postmaster, head of the post office in Santa Monica, and was a politician, and sent my father to military school as a young man. And I think that this gave my father the ability to know how to interact with a very strong, authoritative figure. And I'm sure that served him well in his relationship with Enzo Ferrari. Because my father, of course, you could show a lot of respect, even if he didn't agree, if he wasn't always, feeling like he was being supported in the team. He knew how to show proper respect, and he just wanted to race the cars. He loved racing for Ferrari, and he started out, of course, as the sports car driver. So back then he was first driving in the Le Mans races, and he was a very good sports car driver for Ferrari, and helped them win the constructors championships and sports cars before he was given the chance to get into Formula One.
What was your dad like at home? Because since you already retired when you were born, I was wondering, did you used to watch Formula One Grand Prix together, or in general motorsport on the TV, or maybe go to the track together?
Yes, I mean, my father was a very notable figure in the sport as I was growing up, but his whole life was now post racing, and he had his own restoration shop. So I grew around my father's love of cars with the way he would restore classic cars, but he was always being invited to various racing events. So I grew up, going to the Long Beach Grand Prix when they did have Formula One there. I would go with him to Europe when I got a little bit older, and I went to some Grand Prix races with him and to the Le Mans 24 Hours. But yes, we would get up very early in the morning on the weekends and watch Formula One. My earliest memories were watching races with him of the battles with Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost. And I mean, how could you not fall in love with the sport with those great drivers and such incredible rivalries that those two had?
When your father raced for Ferrari, did he live in Maranello? And did he enjoy the time in Italy when he needed to visit the factory?
Yes, I think, well, maybe I'll share an interesting story with you. He was driving for guys who they owned sports cars that they bought. He was racing Jaguars, he was racing Ferraris, but these were cars that were done racing in Europe and then bought by wealthy individuals who wanted to go racing. And so he started racing for these privateer guys, and he was on a boat to Italy with Richie Ginther, and this was in the mid 1950s. He had already been to the Le Mans race and raced in an Oscar, and he was already somewhat familiar with the European racing. But he was going over there to race for this American guy who had a Ferrari, who wanted to race in all the sports cars. But this is when he got a telegram on the ship, and that's how they would communicate, right? It was like the email of the day, or getting a text on your phone that said, Alberto Ascari was killed testing Ferrari at Monza. And he got a message from the factory, from Enzo Ferrari, to get off the boat and to come to the factory, because Enzo Ferrari had already heard about my father. He had already known about what he was doing in the Carrera Panamericana, where he finished second place in a Ferrari in 1955. And Enzo Ferrari wanted to talk to him immediately. So he got on a train in Genoa. He took the train to Maranello, and Enzo Ferrari right there offered him a drive on the Le Mans sports car team. And so that year, he gave up driving for the privateer because the man understood this is a big opportunity. And he was able to drive the Le Mans 24 Hours. And then he became a full-time Ferrari factory driver. So he was living, yes, in not in Maranello, but in Modena. And there was actually a hotel, the Albergo Reale, which is not there anymore. But that's where everyone was staying who was coming into town, drivers, journalists. So my father would live there during the racing season. And he was very close to the factory, of course. He loved Italy. He imparted that on me too. I love so much Italy and the Italians and their way of life. And my father could speak Italian very well. In fact, he spoke Modenese with the Modenese dialect. So he actually understood what the team was saying, and all the mechanics and the team politics. There was a couple of years there where he could understand what they were saying, but they didn't realize he could understand. So it was maybe to his advantage.